Good morning, everyone. Bonjour. We're just letting everybody find their way in and connect to audio. Got a few people still making their way in. I'm still eating my breakfast.
She's been up since 5, or 4:30. I don't know.
I slept until 5 today. It's
Oh,
fine.
okay.
All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started, and people can kind of find their way in as they go. So, welcome to our first reading network session of the year. We're excited to be back with you. I'm Jordan Sloan, and I'm here with Angeline Humber. And we are here just to do a Q&A about screening. We know there's a lot on the go right now with screening kind of rolling out throughout the province. And we know that French immersion has a little bit of a different perspective on things, as it usually does. It's not quite as straightforward as everything else. So we thought, why not take some time on a Saturday morning to answer questions? So just to let you know, the first part of this session will be recorded. Once we get the end of the sort of, I don't want to say planted questions, but questions that were sent in advance, we will stop the recording and you're welcome to ask questions, do whatever, bring up whatever you want to chat about without too much worry about that recording piece. Before we get going, we are going to do our land acknowledgement for this morning. La OPLV reconnaît que les activités de notre organisation et celles de nos membres se réalisent sur des terres des Autochtones. Nous sommes reconnaissants de pouvoir travailler et vivre sur ces territoires. Nous remercions les peuples Métis, Inuits et des Premières Nations qui prennent soin de ces territoires depuis des temps immémoriaux et qui continuent de contribuer à la force de l'Ontario et des collectivités de la province. Nous voulons également reconnaître et faire l'honneur à la pérennité de la présence des Premières Nations, des Métis et des Inuits qui vivent sur ce territoire depuis des temps immémoriaux.
And I think that it's really important for us, especially with September 30th just around the corner, to acknowledge what a privilege and honor it is to teach French when there are so many languages that have been lost over time. So,
So, are you going to start with this one, Angeline? You can go ahead.
sure.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. So the Right to Read report mentions right within it that the universal early screening is not only effective, but also necessary to protect the rights of all students, particularly students from many code-protected groups. It facilitates early interventions, reduces the potential for bias, and creates better decision-making around student outcomes. And I don't know if you've seen the most recent, the 2-year report. I was excited to see that in there they definitely are pushing for a new curriculum for FSL within that document. So I know I myself was quite excited to see that they're thinking about that. Oh, sorry, Jordan.
No, that's okay. You can put them all up at the same time.
Okay.
Talk about it all at once. So, part of the reason that we're talking about this is the Matthew effect, and that is a biblical reference. We've heard it before, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. And the same thing applies when we look at reading and the development of reading over time. And when we look at the difference between our strong readers or even our average readers and our weak readers, we can see that that gap gets bigger over time. Our students that are strong readers that enjoy reading keep reading. They develop those skills, they build their vocabulary, they continue to grow in that. Weak readers just don't tend to do that. They don't tend to work through those things in the same way. And so over time, they just stay. They make progress, but they never quite catch up. And so when it comes to screening, what we're thinking about is really catching those students early, is finding out right away in that kindergarten, in that grade 1, grade 2 timing, what are the skills that we need to teach our readers? And we need to come back to this idea of screening is to inform our instruction. Screening is not a judgment of you as a teacher. I mean, it's September. You haven't really taught them anything yet, right? It's not a judgment of the teacher that came before or of what students have learned or not learned or picked up or anything. It is simply, is there a red flag here? Do we need to dig a little deeper? Is there a skill that we need to teach our student right now in senior kindergarten, right now in grade 1, that can help them get back up onto that top pathway so that we can have all strong readers or average readers so that we can fill those gaps right away?
It's interesting because I was just having a conversation with my colleague. We were working on the communication letter to go home with the screening results because we're sending home a letter as soon as we're almost done the grade twos. So we're sending a letter home to those grade two families. And that's the piece that we found wasn't in there was this is going to take time. We will see a lot of red and yellow right now. We haven't in English and in French. That's the other thing I think that people are thinking that we're only going to see red and yellow with Acadians reading Français. We're seeing a lot of red and yellow across the board. It's not a and that's okay. It still gives us really valuable information that tells us that we need to shift some things, and I know everyone's doing their best to do that.
And so just to quote there, reading difficulties that begin early in life are devastatingly stable across a child's school career. We need to find out what our students need, and we need to teach them that. So assessment answers questions, and we're going to talk about this in a little more detail, but we kind of want to get into your questions as soon as we can. So we really put this out there to show the difference between screening and diagnostic and progress monitoring. Screening, that's our Acadians Reading Français for French immersion, simply tells us who needs help. It answers that question of who. Are our students on track, or do we need to find out more about them? That's where that diagnostic piece comes in. Our screening is done 2 to 3 times a year. Our diagnostic is done maybe once a year or as needed. Maybe it's not right at the beginning. Maybe it's a little further along. Maybe our screening was so clear that we know, yep, it's very clear we need to work on phonemic awareness right now. But then a couple months down the line, I might want to do that diagnostic to find out more. And we're really lucky in the province that we have Éclair, and that's available for free. And Angeline can talk a little bit more about that as well. A fantastic diagnostic tool. Screening is 1 minute. It's quick, it's snappy. It's going to tell us who. Our diagnostic, that's going to take longer. That's going to tell us what we need to do. What should that help be? What do we need to teach our students? Once we find that out, we can make our plan. We can teach our students, and we'll progress monitor throughout. And Acadians has all those progress monitoring tools available for free on their website. You would do that weekly or bi-weekly, and that's just to ensure that our students are on track and making that progress. So we know right away in October, I know that I'm teaching these skills that I found out my student needed. I know right away, did they get that or not? I don't need to wait till my next screening period to go, oh, darn, back in October, we missed this. I can see it right away.
And Jordan, I am posting the link to Éclair is now up on Transforming FSL. So I've added it in, and it's in OnLit. I just, it's a few places now.
So this is just to illustrate, and this is actually a grade 1 group from a grade 1-2 French immersion class in the TDSB. So this is real, actual data from last year's school year. This is nonsense word fluency from Acadians Reading Français. It is the French immersion class, and these are the grade 1 students in the grade 1-2 class. So you can see at the beginning of the year, we saw quite a bit of red in this class. We had quite a few students who were well below benchmark, not just below, but well below. With that structured, explicit, direct instruction, with that strategic intervention, look at the progress that was made by May, by that second round of screening. When we know what our students need, we can teach it to them. We can fill those gaps. We can make those changes. So screening is, for us in French, Acadians Reading Français. It is done with all students in year 2 kindergarten through grade 2. It's done 2 to 3 times a year. So Acadians is intended to be done 3 times a year. The ministry is mandating that 1 time and then a second time for anyone below, but you have access to all of those materials for free on the Acadians website. The only thing you pay for in Acadians is the training. Once you've done the training, you have access to all of the resources on their website. It is fast, it is reliable, and it is a valid indicator. Excuse me, it is standardized. And that is so important that you stick to the way it is intended to be put out there so that when you look at the data compared to those benchmarks, you're getting real information. If you give your students an extra couple of seconds, or if you give them the instructions in English, or if you accept their answers in English, or if you change the grade level, you invalidate all of that. And so maybe then, yeah, when you put your data in, you look like you've got way more green in your fancy spreadsheet. But is that actually helping your students? Are you actually getting the information you need about your students? Whereas when you stick to that standardized instruction, yeah, it's possible. Like when we looked at that last screen, how many students were red and how many students were yellow? Yeah, but look at how we can make differences, how we can make those changes. So again, our screening simply tells us what students and what systems are at risk.
Well, and I really think that that's important for us too, because not only does it inform classroom decisions, but it informs often school decisions. So if you have learning support teacher or something, so that data being standardized is critical, and even system level support. So I know currently we are fortunate to have interventionists that are doing the screening and or providing release to educators so that they can do the screening. That's our goal, right? Is that classroom educators are confident and comfortable doing that screening, but that also that information is going to help us as far as making decisions around where those interventionists will be supporting, and you know, it's for the students.
So just some things to remember. The Acadians Reading Class Essentials workshop is available in asynchronous. Some boards are choosing to have in-person options or even virtual training sessions. If you do the asynchronous training, you get to listen to my voice an awful lot for about 6 full hours of the 12 is listening to me. But the thing to remember is that you need to train your evaluators. It's so important so that they do follow those standardized instructions and the ways of marking, the notations, the scoring. They really need to know how to do it so that, again, we're sticking with those standardized results so that we know what our students need. The training is also going to give you all of the approved accommodations and modifications because we're only making the ones that are required and permitted through Acadian's Reading Class Set. Anything else that we're changing is going to invalidate those benchmarks. It's not saying don't screen those students. It's saying we're going to have to look at this differently. Okay. Lots of considerations around logistics. I will tell you right now, the biggest logistical thing that I've talked to people in the province about is when you print the little booklets, the way you have to turn the pages so that you photocopy them so that they print into little booklets can be a challenge. And then the other thing it's going to talk about is the use of data. So how you can use that data to form groups, to work with students, to inform your instruction. All of that's going to come through that training.
And
And
legal size paper is our friend, because we last year had it on letter size paper, and this year it's on legal, and it's like, oh, it's so much nicer. And the other thing that I find very valuable is what we often do, is go out to schools as teams and have a chance to, okay, so I'm going to model for you, then we're going to do one together, like, but typically we'll pick a grade 3 student for all of them, because that way we know we're not invalidating anyone's data or anything. And then they'll take a turn and then ask for feedback. So that seems to work really well. And I know myself, I like to kind of go over it every time before I'm digging into it.
So just an overview quickly, and this is an onlet slide that I stole and brought over here of the screener implementation timeline. Sometime in the first week of school, I know this year is a bit different because we haven't done this before and everybody's kind of doing a lot of that, like, oh, darn, we missed that step, we're going back. But an information letter should have been sent from principal's home explaining screening. By mid-November, we're looking to have all initial screening completed. After that initial screener, the results are shared with parents, and the check mark is done on the report card, which goes home in January. For me, this is a really interesting timing because you're going to have those results in time for parent-teacher interviews. So I myself would be having those conversations then and saying, you're not going to see this on a report card till January, but this is what we were seeing. You can even pull them out, those fancy spreadsheets that you've got with all the colors, and say, like, this is what I'm seeing. but this is what we're doing about it. This is our plan, because you've got that and you've got that. This is how we're going to use the data. So don't be alarmed in January when it still says that your student is below benchmark, because we're working on it. We've been working on it since November. Then that second round of screening must be completed by mid-March and indicated on the final report card.
And I know our board has a very ambitious goal. I'm hoping that we'll be able to achieve it, to actually screen all kindergarten and grade 1 students in the middle of the year again. And then those grade 2s, of course, that are below benchmark. And then at the end of the year, uh, screening all of the kindergarten and grade 1s that were still below benchmark in the middle of the year, and all grade 2s. And the reason we want to do all grade 2s is because there isn't mandatory screening in grade 3, and we want to make sure we capture the most recent information about those students. And also the kindergarten grade 1 piece is because the benchmark shifts so much from beginning of year to middle of year. So we want as much data as we can to support those students.
And again, this is what it looks like on the report card. So that early reading screening for grades 1 and 2, kindergarten report card looks different, but completed, yes or no, date, benchmark met, yes or no. It's very simple. That's it. That's all. Again, the screening is not to inform evaluation, right? You haven't taught them in September when you're doing this. You haven't taught them anything yet. It's so tempting to say, oh, they got a green, they get an A. They got a yellow, they get a B, right? But that's not what it is. Also, it's 1 minute. Imagine if you're having a bad day, right? And you were judged on 1 minute, or you didn't want to talk to that person, or you didn't get that, or for whatever reason, right? We need so much more to inform our evaluation when it comes to that report card mark, when it comes to the comments. This is to inform our instruction.
The other thing is it's 1 minute, in many cases in September, and this is going out in February. So think of that impact. And especially in FSL, there's 4 strands, right? And reading isn't only about being able to decode. So it's just kind of keeping that in mind too when having conversations and thinking about those report cards.
All right, this is my favorite part of all of the Acadians training that we did. We talked about this as an example, and this was given to us by someone from Acadians, and they said, imagine, because we talk about this a lot in French immersion. We have this discussion a lot. Imagine that the goal is to run a marathon. So my goal is to run a marathon. Angeline's goal is to run a marathon. I have been training for my marathon for a year. I've been on it. I've been doing all the runs. I've been doing everything. Angeline decides 3 weeks before the run, she's going to do the marathon also. There is nothing to say that she is not going to finish that marathon. There's nothing to say that she's not even going to beat me in the marathon just because I've been doing it for longer. When it comes to that goal, that reading goal, and when we really think about our French immersion students, because we talk about this a lot, we've got students who start in kindergarten in French. We've got students who start in grade 1. We've got certain students who start in grade 2. Who's to say that they're not going to reach that marathon finish point just because they started in grade 1? Our goal is biliterate readers. Our goals are the same, the development of those skills. We're informing our instruction. We can't just take away that idea and say, well, they didn't start at the same time. Right? The goal is the same. Let's get them there.
I do love that analogy.
Me too.
So,
Do you want to do it?
I know we talked about, and I think that that's been one thing that we've really been trying to hone in on, is making sure we have some consistency and understanding of what all the vocabulary is, like screeners, diagnostics, and it doesn't help when companies sometimes call their so quick phonics screener is a prime example of a diagnostic that they've labeled quick phonics screener. So a way to confuse us more. But as Jordan mentioned, we are very fortunate to have worked with an outstanding team on the creation of ECLAIR, which is a diagnostic assessment tool, valid, research-based, thanks to the team at OISE for all of their work on that side, and to the 6 school boards from across Ontario with a variety of entry points and percentages of French to help to develop this. The other thing about it was we tried to make it as understandable, so a no training required type document. Not that you couldn't have training and professional learning around it, but that you could pick it up and even pick only one page of it up and still be able to do those assessments. So looking at the why would you use a diagnostic assessment? So looking at your Acadians data, you might want to look at those students that you're noticing are red and yellow and do this with them to determine what skills need to be taught. So as Jordan mentioned, once per year, more if needed. So I'm thinking if you do your beginning year data, middle of year data, that you may notice that, hey, I want to do that again. And of course, it takes a little longer, and it's not standardized. So you can give more time. You can give prompts.
And just to say, I did this. So my school board has different starting points all the way through. And we did this with students that started in grade 4. And we did this with students who started in grade 7, right? They're developing those skills just to see where they're at and to see what we needed to teach those students.
The other thing is it's different from the screening tools, as we mentioned, but it does work well in tandem with it. So just making sure that it isn't to replace Acadians Reading Français, it's to be used alongside and in tandem to determine those skills that are needed.
And just
So
because your students show up as green or as at or above benchmark, it doesn't mean that you're not going to do a diagnostic with them, because you're going to look at how they scored. Because you might look at that and be like, I'm just not sure. There's some interesting things here. I want to dig a little deeper. That's what that diagnostic is going to allow you to do. It's not just, oh, we're just going to do a diagnostic because our students got red. You may have students who are in the red where you're like, it's very clear what they need right now. I don't need to do the diagnostic. So it's not an automatic, this is who does it, this is not who does it.
thanks, Jordan. And just to kind of share that it wasn't Jordan and Angeline that developed Declare. It was a huge team of people. As I mentioned, a large team from OISE, led by Dr. Becky Chen. We had Leslie Dell from ACP was part of the work, and she definitely brought a pan-Canadian perspective. Dr. Carolyn Erdos, again, all the school boards, Dr. José Leboutillier, and again, she brought a perspective from outside of Ontario to the table, and a lot of amazing knowledge just with her background in the Institute of Researches in Second Language. Dr. Michelle Minor-Corriveau, Dr. Una Malcolm from IDAO. So it was just amazing to work with this team to develop this tool to support educators across Ontario. And it begins with that phonological awareness tools to look at that. The one thing that was a big learning for a lot of people on the team was the syllables. I know I when I taught kindergarten, I spent a lot of time in syllable land. Now that I know what I know, I would not do that, right? I think if you're interested, there is a great paper that kind of explains that the sooner we can get to that phoneme piece, that's going to be more helpful for reading. And actually, that was even Dr. Chen. She was like, Angeline, no, I think we need. And she, at the end of the day, they looked at the data and they're like, you're right, there isn't a strong correlation between syllables and being able to decode words. So that was huge. And then, of course, getting into word reading skills. And I know that the nonsense words piece has really kind of people question why nonsense words. Well, we really want to make sure that students can actually decode, and it goes through. So from simple orthography, so 1 letter, 1 sound, to complex with 2 letters, 1 sound, and even more complex with 3 letters, 1 sound. And I know that people are asking, well, why aren't there any benchmarks? Well, because Ontario, it's different across Ontario. And I may have a student in grade 5 that I want to know a little bit more about. I might pull out Éclair. I know across our school board, however, we do have sort of our goal is for the end of grade 2 that they're mostly successful. I don't want to say completely successful, because that's mostly successful with all of the measures by the end of grade 2. But we start with 100% in junior kindergarten, so it looks a little different. And the other thing about benchmarks, I know OISE was prepared to give, like, GCDSB, you can get your benchmarks. Renfrew, you can have your benchmarks. But I said, I don't want the benchmarks from last year and 2 years ago. I want them to shift because our practice is shifting. So I'm hoping that they would even get a little bit, they'll be improved from what they were as we shift practice.
So then flipping back to progress monitoring, it's done with some students. It can be done weekly or bi-weekly or monthly. Like it depends on what your students need and what you're looking for. It's those very brief measures of targeted skills, and we modify as appropriate. So this is where you're going to go to the Acadience site. You're going to get, there's 20 alternate forms for each of the measures. So if I'm doing facilité à lire les non mots and I want to progress with that nonsense word reading, progress monitor with it, I'm going to print off the 20 additional forms, and I'm going to do that weekly or bi-weekly or whatever my students need to see if they're making that progress. So again, it's that 1 minute quick check. I can set where my student is, I can set my goal, and I can progress monitor throughout. And the general idea is if I make that diagonal line, and you can get this book cover on Acadience as well, and I see more than 3 times that I've progress monitored where I'm below that target line, that's where I'm going to want to adjust something. Okay.
There's
And there's different things you can adjust. It's not always right away the instruction's not working. Maybe it's the size of the group. Maybe it's who is in the group. Maybe it's I need to see my student for 3 minutes 3 times a day instead of a longer period. So when I adjust something, I'm going to adjust one thing and keep progress monitoring and see if I can get those changes to go above that trajectory line.
Jessica asked a great question, and it's my understanding that yes, indeed, there are flow progress monitoring tools in the works presently with
Yeah, they're just
Acadience.
not up on the site right now.
Yeah, and
I
I think that
mean, grade 3 to 6 is also still in the research phase. So if you are looking to use something like Flow with your grade 3 to 6s, you can reach out to Acadience to be part of that research phase.
I did that. I sent the email. But that's the one thing I know we're kind of anxious for that because our grade twos in particular, if for any reason their assessment is invalidated, having those flow tools will be kind of critical. So that's I know that they're working hard.
We're working on everything. So just to put it all together for you, universal screening, all students, 2 to 3 times a year, fast, reliable, valid, tells us who. That's Katie's reading class set. Diagnostic assessment, as needed, some students, as needed time of year, longer, often unstandardized, assessment of broad skills, what we need to teach, that's éclair. Progress monitoring, the students that we're working with. So some students weekly, bi-weekly, very brief measures of that targeted skill that we're working on. That's Acadience reading class set, tells us, is the instruction working or do we need to change something? So that's a brief, quick overview. I will tell you these excellent, excellent resources. So Next Steps in Literacy Instruction is fantastic if you are looking for something that's going to show you what to teach. So say I get to my data and I find out I need to be doing more work around phonemic awareness. Chapter 3 is going to tell me about phonemic awareness, but it's also got a lesson plan for phonemic awareness. And then it's got a whole activity toolkit for phonemic awareness, phonics, comprehension, vocabulary, and fluency. So excellent book. If you are interested on Let's doing a book study, I've only got 2 weeks left, but all the recordings are available on the website, French and English. And then the other really great book is Untangling Database Decision Making. It just takes all of that stuff about making decisions and how to use your data and makes it really understandable. So if you are the person working with your data in any way, if you're the administrator or the lead or the coach or whoever, I would highly recommend this book. It just made it really, really understandable and clear for me in a different way than before. Okay, so we did in the registration form ask you to send in any questions you had in advance. So we thought we would take a few moments and answer some of those things as they came up, and then we'll turn off the recording and open up the floor. So the first question we got is, how are others gathering and analyzing data so that they can use it to inform instruction? Because at this point, with Acadience Reading Class, we do not have access to ALO to have that data piece done. It is coming in 2025, but in the meantime, we're going to have to be a little bit creative about how we track everything. So Acadience has made their ADM system free for everyone in Ontario for this year. Some boards are concerned about some of the security pieces there. So make sure you do check with your board if that's a concern. There are multiple spreadsheets available. ONLIT and OMLTA are going to be sharing the ones with the benchmarks. So they are available on ONLIT right now. You can go through. There are 3 sets of spreadsheets on ONLIT, one for the English benchmarks, one with the Français benchmarks, and one with the French immersion benchmark. So note that they are different. Acadiens Reading Français has 2 sets of benchmarks, one set for French immersion and one set for students who are Français first language. Angeline, what are you doing in your board?
We are using ALO in English, of course, because that's a handy dandy tool, but we are using an Acadiens Reading Français spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet that is, well, it's really helpful because it provides us with the information at a glance, and we're hoping that it will transition nicely into ALO next year because we want that data and to watch growth over time. And also hoping to do some research across Ontario to continue to look at, as Jordan mentioned, that we can finish the marathon in both English and in French, or we call it a duathlon maybe, and looking at that across Ontario.
Okay, what does a structured literacy block look like for Tier 1 instruction? I'm going to pass this one to Angeline because she's got all the answers for us.
And I feel bad because I know some people were with us yesterday, so I'll go through it rather quickly, and you can always reach out if you want more info. So we in our school board for English had we were able to purchase UFly for all of our English educators, and so this is actually the model that they recommend. So that you have that 30 minutes of explicit systematic instruction connected to word recognition, then so what does that look like for us? Well, we are currently using Sonograph, which we had the permission from UFly to adapt and make. So currently lessons 1 through 58 are available. But what that looks like across a week is we're doing 1 lesson for 2 days, the next lesson for 2 days, and the 5th day, we're doing progress monitoring, which is really helpful, and a review as needed. And then if there's extra time, we recommend spending a little extra time in that language comprehension strand of the rope. Then moving into that next 30 minutes, so looking at that small group instruction and what does that look like, and small group instruction in centers, but also note that that's not just connected to word recognition, it's also connected to that language comprehension based on the data that you have for your students. And I really, really like the decision-making tree from ONLIT when it comes to that 30 minutes of time and what your small group instruction might look like. Jordan, did you want to say anything about the decision tree?
Just that it's amazing.
It
It's
is.
available for free on ONLIT. All of this stuff that we're sharing from ONLIT is available for free, so you can go in and pick up anything. But it just helps us to consider not only what we think of immediately. So the nonsense word reading is the one that gets me, or the flow. Facilité en lecture orale, oral reading fluency is the one that gets me, because sometimes we look at that score and we think, oh, the issue is fluency, so we need to practice fluency. But sometimes we need to take a step back and look at the skills leading up to that and say, are our students solid in their word reading? Is the issue fluency or is the issue phonics? Do we need to take that step back? So to me, I just come back to this decision-making tree a lot to be like, am I thinking the right things? Do I need to consider anything else?
Thanks, Jordan. And so looking at your small group instruction, and you'll see here, there's just an example of what that might look like over time. So that group A is the group that really needs some extra support with that decoding and encoding. And you'll see that they're seeing 4 days out of 5. And that's with intent, right? Because they need at minimum 3 times a week, 30 minutes a week for that intervention to really work. And then group B is looking at, they still need support, but they're still getting 3 times a week. Group C is actually working on writing. So again, it's using the data that you have to make those decisions around what that small group instruction looks like. So this is just a sample of what it might look like. And then of course the last 30 minutes looking at that comprehension, interaction, and that's where you can use like the most rich texts, and there's some really great books out there and conversations. And when I say texts, I don't mean just books, because there's videos, there's posters, there's so many things you can use for this strand, and really looking at that action-oriented task to be the end of that learning cycle that you're working towards What is it we want students to know and be able to do? And oh, I'm not even in the right part. Sorry, that was centers. And how are we going to get them there? So looking at what are we going to do? So this is just an example with Patience Petite Chenille. And yes, I'm reading the book multiple times throughout the learning cycle. I'm also pulling in some videos of what metamorphosis looks like. And this part we highly recommend, especially in immersion, because you have so much to teach and the same amount of time as everyone else, that you connect it to the science and social studies, and in some cases that mental health, the social emotional piece, strand or piece of learning within your classroom.
Okay, so another question we got quite a bit was, how can I create groups and structure interventions using this data? And Angeline kind of talked about that a little bit as she went through the last one. Um, if you do the data intervention portion of Acadians, that is what this is all about, is how to take your data. So it's a full day about how to take your data. I really like, that was my favorite part of the training. I think it's looking at your data and seeing the trends in what you got. Where are the results? And then even taking the time to dig a little bit deeper and, who fits together, but also considering, because we know this is grade 1 and grade 2 in kindergarten, we need to consider, attendance. We need to consider behavior. We need to consider who can work with who. So all of those pieces do come into play.
And so again, that just from that sample, really being intentional about how you are putting your small groups and flexible. So it doesn't mean that because a student is in group A this week that maybe I'm progress monitoring on Friday and I notice that that student needs to be in a different group, or I notice some growth, or maybe 4 of the students are really demonstrating a lot of development and this student isn't. So I need to really always constantly move those or use that decision tree to make some decisions around who is in which group.
Okay, I'm going to give this one to you, Angeline. What resources can be used for tier 2 and 3 with French language learners?
Well, it's funny because I think back to when I first started teaching and I still hear it, and it makes me very sad when I hear it, but we don't have any resources in French immersion. I think that we've definitely come a long, long, long way. And also just thinking about how we can use the tools that we have. So I know ourselves, we're very fortunate to have literacy kits. So in those literacy kits, we have magnetic chips and wands that we can use with Elkonin boxes or sound boxes. We have magnetic letters, we have magnetic tiles, we have dry erase boards. So using all of those tools. And then with Sonograph, we have Lancer et Lire, which are great for a small group. And I really like from Seven Mighty Moves, there's a decodable text routine. And I find that really, really helpful for that small group instruction and using those decodable texts that we have access to. And of course, within Sonograph, there are the decodable texts that you could use with those small groups and the Lancer et Lire.
And remembering that when you're working with students at tier 2 and tier 3, we're not doing it at the same time. We're not taking them away from their tier 1 instruction to provide tier 2 and tier 3. We need to make sure they're still there. So if they're doing sonograph, they're still in the room for that part of the day so that they're not falling further and further behind, but we're using this to bump up that progress.
And then looking at that language comprehension strand of the rope, I am a huge believer in play-based learning when it comes to that, especially in FI. So building that language base. So how might you use that to support that language comprehension? Tea à l'école has this great tool that they developed. It's actually fairly new to look at that oral language development. Le langage oral à portée de la main is written by Ontario's speech language pathologist and has outstanding strategies. Strive for Five, I just love that. Actually, we're doing a book talk specific for French educators coming up this fall, and so I'm excited about that. And we actually, just so you know, we have permission from the author to translate the tools that you might use with the questions and pieces you'd use with students to French, and just working through the edits on those, and we'll share them widely. I have to send them back to the author just for a stamp of approval, and we'll get those out there to you. And of course, IDELO has a wealth of resources, and I love some of their new material. They've really come like I just love it. And they're also very responsive. If there's something on there that you find you have any questions about, let them know, and they're very responsive that way. And of course, using those rich read alouds, fiction and nonfiction texts to support language comprehension, vocabulary, and just that understanding and background knowledge piece.
Okay, and I think we answered this one a little bit earlier. Can I screen students in grade 2+? You can, for sure. Oral reading fluency is a great thing to keep doing, and that's what we use in English for grade 2 and up. It is in the research phase with Acadience Reading Classe right now, so if you do want to take part in that, you are welcome to reach out to Acadience and get involved in that. How can we share data and next steps with families without creating concern around terms such as below or well below benchmark? So much communication, right? And again, we're at that ideal point in the year where you are having that sit down with parents, where you can talk about what's been done, what the process is, what it looks like, so that it's not a surprise in January when there's a check mark that has appeared from an assessment that was done possibly in September. There's also the letters that are going home. So having that ongoing communication, because we do know that screening is in the news. We do know that this is something that parents are going to be on the lookout for. Angeline, you want to add to that?
And I think not only, again, I know I brought it up earlier, but it's not a judgment of educators by any shape. It's not a judgment of parenting. It's not a judgment of the child, right? It's a it's going to support. And I think, I know earlier I said, even like, we're going to see a lot of red and yellow, and we're going to see it in English, we're going to see it in French. So I know that one of our concerns is that a parent will get their information home and they'll be like, oh, French must not be for my child. So making sure we're kind of you know, with our letters home, making sure that we're reassuring parents. But at the same time, if there's concern, we need to be really honest about concerns that we're having, not about the French immersion piece, but about what can we do to support your child to be successful and get to the end of that marathon.
How will teachers be able to administer a screener and implement structured literacy if they are not knowledgeable themselves about this topic? So this is new. This is new for a lot of us. A lot of us were not taught to teach reading this way. There is so much happening. If you are on Facebook, you are seeing all the things on the go. And Kim Lockhart is here and she shares loads of stuff with resources and things she's reading and pairing podcasts with books. And there's loads out there. So I will say the Reading Road Trip podcast, I'm a big podcast person. I'm a big walk the dog and listen, is one of my favorites by far. So I listen to that quite a lot. Getting out there and learning more on your own, following things like OMLTA Reading Network, following ONLIT, getting involved in those book studies, looking at the videos that are available, the PA days. ONLIT is starting a little campaign right now with just those short reels on Instagram, sharing just enough information to make you kind of go, maybe I need to learn a little bit more about this. So there's a lot out there, and the advantage that we have right now is that all of this stuff that's coming out is free. It's free for educators. It's never been like this. It's always been like, well, go buy this book and do this program and do this thing. Right now, this is free. So take advantage, get out there, follow recommendations and take the time to learn what you need to learn to benefit yourself and your students.
And I do, though, if you are administering the screener, please, that training is critical. I see that in this question. That's my hope, is that people will make sure that they're trained before administering the screener, because the other piece is, if we administer it, and somebody else administers it, the first one, like, it's not valid. So we don't want to invalidate a student's data either. And reach out. There's so many people across the province, actually, yeah, so many people that are really, really sharing their knowledge and building their knowledge to be able to support each other with that structured literacy piece.
And just before we head out into your questions, we want to plug a couple of things that are coming up. The OMLTA is hosting virtual conversation cafes, so come in and join and speak French, as well as the save the date for the upcoming spring conference. There's a lot on the go. Angeline and I will be there with some Reading Network stuff. And if you are following ONLIT, on October 1st, Laura Bross will be talking about her language block. She is fabulous, and it is worth a listen. Even if you are a grade 1 teacher, this grade 2, 3 session will be amazing. You'll get so many great ideas for how you can do instruction, how you can use that data to inform your instruction.
Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording because I know sometimes people get a little hesitant to ask questions.